You're tuned in to the Stingbat Radio Network on FM 101.2 KRPG.
Welcome to Dungeon Master Diaries, a podcast about Shadowdark and other role-playing games where two GMs talk about the recent experiences at the table and hopefully give you something useful that you can take to yours. On the show today, we discuss early notes from running an open table. Hello there, sages and adventurers. My name is Jody, and with me, as always, is my good friend and adventure companion in the world of GMing, Matt. How are you?
I'm doing well, Jody. I'm excited to have this conversation. I think this is a great follow-up to our last episode. I think this is going to be kind of a cool 1-2 punch.
Yeah, we've kind of avoided doing like sequential episodes, and yet this just came together so nice. You and I have got in some hours at the table over the last couple weeks betwixt recordings, but you got a whole lot of things going on. If you listened to last episode, dear listeners, you might actually want to check that one out first, but you don't have to, because Matt's going to take you to the table right now and catch you up on what's going on.
That's right. So I have now run 3 sessions of my online open table game that shall henceforth be called The Kindly Craw, set in Torchwick, more on that later, and the surrounding realm. Now, we'll go into lots of details about these 3 sessions that I ran for 3 different groups of players who all took 3 different adventure hooks and went and explored the sewers beneath the town of Torchwick, some kobold caverns that were to the southwest that required some overland travel, and to go investigate an abandoned keep that lie just outside the forest that surround Torchwick to the west. These 3 quest hooks have actually given myself, and I think once this campaign continues to grind itself into a menagerie of rumors and quest hooks and just that like wonderful place that campaigns eventually get to when the threads start to intermingle, I think, boy howdy, we are set for some great adventure from here on out.
Fantastic. Let us gather around the fire then and chit-chat about said adventures, both behind and that maybe some that lie ahead for the folks in The Kindly Craw. All right, Matt. So I'm going to follow the Sly Flourish model of note-taking here, and also your show notes that you wrote in advance, which is lovely because we don't usually do that. Things that went well, but let's start with your players. You had 15 different players.
That's right.
Holy cow. So every session was an entirely new group of folks?
That's right. And
spicy.
Yes, very much so. And I just want to say right off the bat that all 3 groups were outstanding. And so a lot of what this episode is going to focus on is reflections on sort of the things that I did. And what I don't want to have happen is for any player to feel like if they play in this game that there's going to be some autopsy of the campaign.
You didn't have them sign the required waivers and give a fluid sample?
I just forgot about that. Oops.
Okay.
Next session.
You also had, I will say, I lurked, and thank you to the group who went into the Kobold Caverns for enduring my lurking, but along with a number of other folks were tuned in and listening along as they adventured. But I did lurk one session just because I wanted to be a little informed about what all this might look like, and agreed just in eavesdropping in that one group. It was a great mix of play styles and energy and just fun. And one of the things I've praised you before and will continue to do so in your GMing is your GMing style, I think, is very malleable to whatever the players kind of need and whatever they're coming with energy-wise. So it seemed like that was super successful. So what do you think? Let's start with the positives and then maybe get into the picking your process, because we're not going to pick on players. So everybody should feel safe diving back into the world of Torchwick and the regions therein. But what do you feel like has gone well in these opening sessions?
So first of all, start off, the players were awesome. The sessions were fun. So I think that's really, inevitably most GM advice and stuff like that comes down to if the players had a good time and the sessions were fun and the vibes were good, then it was a success. And so I'm going to start there, that every single player brought a great energy, regardless of, we had a few players who this was the first time they'd really, played Shadow Dark. I didn't necessarily know that. And there were a couple players who I didn't realize that was where they were coming from, but I didn't really notice. They took to the style of play, brought their own style of play. So that I think is actually it's one of the stressful things about running open tables, especially online, is because you lack that in-person ability to kind of get on the same level as somebody really easily if you're sitting across a physical table. And then you have the fact that there's a diversity of folks who are showing up and you don't know who's going to show up. The worry is not necessarily that you're going to get somebody who the Shadow Dark community doesn't really have a whole lot of like mean or those kinds of players that one might conjure up as being problematic. I haven't really ever heard of any of those folks. I know that's probably happened, but it's certainly never happened to me. What you worry about is that there's going to be play styles that maybe just don't gel, and that folks are that there's some friction between what certain players like and don't like, and that those things aren't going to match up. And I think that what we did was an example of bringing together a diverse group of players who did have different play styles, some who wanted to lean more into role play, some who wanted to lean more into the kind of just gameplay elements. And I think it worked. I think it's one of those things that sort of disproves that notion that you need people who are all aligned in the same play style at all times at every table. Do I think that certain people might want to play with other folks more than others? I don't know, maybe. But ultimately, these 3 sessions, I think, are an example of the fact that you can have a fun session with a wide variety of folks at the table.
The session I saw, again, I'll just stress that was really evident that it was different play styles and they meshed well. It's one of the joys of Shadow Dark, frankly, is because it's rules light and the tone is relatively clear and the vibe of it is clear. Like, that in and of itself draws towards a certain expectation from the player. Okay, so people were rad. That went well. Sessions went really well. How about the materials you were working with? You, again, more on that later, but yeah. Last time we talked, there was the quest board and the map and kind of Torchwick itself. When we spent a fair amount of time on our last episode talking about those starting materials, did they serve you the way you were hoping?
They did. I will say that online, everyone's technology setup is a little differently, or is set up a little differently. So you can't see what other people are seeing on their screens. So the way that I had Owlbear Rodeo set up, I don't want to get too much into this, but the map and the quest board were a part of the VTT, kind of set up the kind of landing page, if you will. And I think that having a map that is not to scale and is not, I think we described it last time as kind of a diegetic in-world map or something like that. We talked about the Dolmenwood map, which I think is kind of the gold standard for a player map. It's got just so much juicy stuff that you can kind of go out and explore, and on the way you'll find different things. It worked. It worked 100%. I have adventure locations keyed to a bunch of points of interest that are on this map, and they corresponded to things that were on the quest board. I do want to talk about the quest board a little bit later and things that I think maybe I'd like to improve upon going forward. I'll just say the quest board was successful in doing what it was supposed to do. But I think, as I am wont to do, Jody, I always want to give players options, but sometimes, quest boards, if you put too many things on them, they can kind of muddy the waters in terms of what the group wants to do. So overall, my player zine map and quest board, all of which I'll post in the show notes, worked very well. And I don't think I would actually have changed any of them. But the only thing that I have some very minor quibbles with was the quest board. But I think that those quibbles are largely, I don't know, they were assuaged by the way that the sessions went. So I go back and forth. More on that later. What I wanted to ask you was, you just played a session, and you had sent me a text sort of a couple of weeks ago about the company that I use to get maps printed out. And so on the note of maps, I wanted to actually ask you how, I think you printed out like a massive map of Saltmarsh, right?
Yeah, it tweaked it with some liberties to match my campaign setting, because there's some things about the actual map that don't work in my setting. So I tweaked it and got it done. And last session folks walked in and the table center of it was just a big map of town. And since our session was going to focus beneath the surface of the town, it was a good kind of just visual to dive in on before we got into needing minis on a map and player aids and things like that to clutter up the space. But it's Hanker and Fernale a long time ago proffered the notion that the beauty of an RPG is that and it's kind of something you and I use in the show, is this notion of gathering around a fire and having an artifact, something central that is the focal point of folks gathering. And if you've ever been camping and gathered around a campfire, or, if you come from a family that sat down and had meals together as a regular thing, there is a sense of community of gathering at a table with an artifact in the center, be it food, be it a campfire, or be it a fantasy map. And that unifying message that it sends is so strong. It conveys an amount of tone. It conveys an amount of, not to oversell this too much, but an amount of ritual, which is actually a thing I love about role-playing games, is in the broad sense of our dice are very kind of strange objects, and we roll them and they have a unique feel and look. We have, almost all of us are relatively particular about how we lay out our character sheets, perhaps what pens or pencils we use, he said.
I don't know. I don't know anybody like
You have totally infected me, dude. Also, remind me off air that there is a thing I found for those pencils you gave me that is amazing.
Sweet. I'll put in the show notes the kind of pencils that they are.
Oh, indeed, you should. So these are books and our tomes gathered around us. So yeah, the map is, I think, no matter what kind of game you are running, whether it is purest of pure theater of the mind, whether it is an online environment or right there sitting down in person, or a tournament game. Kelsey is somewhat famous for her giant table map, and you walk by and it's just a person with a big map in front of them, and you can sit down and start playing on the map. The shared map, be it Overland, Dungeon, or whatever, is one of those I would have a hard time playing a session that was purely theater of the mind, where we don't at least have a map to look at in some way. That unifying piece is so strong. So yeah, thank you for the recommendation.
48hourprint.com,
there
baby.
It was, yeah, and it was printed in that timeline. Took about a week to get it. Caught it there was a discount code and was pretty reasonable price wise. And yeah, I know hopefully other players, because mine may have burned their bridges in part of town, future episode perhaps. But yeah, it just seemed like for something we've spent a bunch of time in. And then one of my players did say that plays in both of our games was like, oh, it'd be so neat to have all of these maps of all the places we've gone up on the walls, as I'm literally sitting in, your game room, Matt, and there are literally these posters up on the walls of all the different places we've been. It is really cool, because then you look at those and there's meaning to those places and towns and all of that. So yeah, and it's cool that you're creating your shared world. So let's dive into that. Actually, I want to pick up on that thread, if I may. A big discussion we had last time, before you had run these 3 sessions, was the notion of emergent play or things being created in the world. Where are we at with that? Is that happening yet? Is it too soon to tell? Where are you at with that?
So 2 things. First of all, So the short answer is yes, it's happening. And this is going to be, I'm going to try and make it not a long-winded answer, but it might be, because emergent narrative takes time. And so what I feel like has happened in these first 3 sessions is that we have established some villains or some antagonists, you might say. So in our last session that I just ran at the time of recording yesterday, we have established that there is this female elf called the Bandit Queen, who is from an adventure module and that I am running set in an old abandoned keep. Well, that just the players choosing that quest hook means that those characters have brought that module and all of the things in it to life and have now irrevocably changed that point of interest, which means I have to start thinking what happens if they go back there. So there are 2 things I think are really interesting. The fact that each group went to a different place was actually both a blessing and a curse, because it meant that we didn't really see very much of each of those individual places, only a handful of rooms. Whereas, if you were going back to the same adventure location, you would start to see more of it and plumb the depths and et cetera, et cetera. But what is beautiful about that is that it made those places real in the world and allowed for the players to engage with them in a meaningful way. And we discovered some things about the relationship between some kobolds and orcs, that there's some relationship happening in these caverns. We discovered that there's something very bad happening beneath Torchwick in the sewers. And so that has now created some situations in town that I can link with some of the town elements. And I have a fairly sizable gap just because my schedule in early March is pretty jam-packed. So there's a sizable gap between when this 3rd session will end, or did end, excuse me, and when we will play next in kind of mid to later March. And what that means is that because we're using 1-to-1 time, that the world can grow. And I actually think that this is it is sort of just out of the blue, scheduling wise. It's a really cool thing to have happen, because if 2 weeks pass or 3 weeks pass between this 3rd session and the next one, that means that those antagonists can kind of move and those factions can kind of start to get built. And I'm going to do some work figuring out what those factions have been up to. And so as far as the emergent narrative, it's like the players flipped on a bunch of light switches that were off, and it's interesting to know which ones they switched on and which ones they switched off or left off. And so to me, that has given rise to the thing that I love most about role-playing games, especially in fantasy settings, which is these factional elements. Especially in like a sandbox, I feel like they're almost a necessity. So that's a long way of saying that emergent narrative is happening. It is also happening with players. The carousing and learning downtimes have resulted in some really interesting things. So I don't want to say too much about that, because I kind of want I'm really interested to see where those things go and to see if who comes back and whose characters kind of continue to grow. But we've already had 2 of our priests of Saint Taragnus got arrested and thrown in jail for a few days because they burned down or set on fire a location in town, which we decided was a brothel that in a drunken stupor, they were like, us lawful, priests of Saint Taragnus shall burn. It turns out that place was where another character had taken up an employment in order to learn as a thief better disguise through the art of makeup, which I thought was outstanding. And so you're already seeing this like wonderful kind of layers of emerging narrative happening. And so when those players come back, those things will hopefully be able to matter. So there's my long-winded answer.
You just touched on something that is absolutely one of those wisdom of the internet things that I bristle at. So I'm going to try to not get on my soapbox and continue a rant.
Jody, I will drag a soapbox over to you after my 7-minute little diatribe there.
Appreciate that. Just this. Often when you hear people talking about modules and folks who like to run modules online, of which I am unabashedly one, the notion of emergent play is somehow propped up as being in opposition with running modules, as though the two are totally different schools of thought. And what you just highlighted is, for me, one of the reasons I love modules is I grab this module, I go, I never would have thought of having orcs and kobolds work together or have some shared relationship. I wouldn't have done that. Oh, an elven bandit queen. That seems like probably a strange thing. I feel for some reason that feels cliche to me, but here it is, and my players have shown interest in it. So now how do I weave these disparate elements together? And in that weaving, we end up somewhere entirely new that is not in any of these modules, that is unique to our table, that is totally created by us. And that in some way, if I thought up a bandit queen that was a human, that would be more noble of a game or a better game because it was and it's often
or if
presented
you just rolled
that
it up at the table,
right?
or whatever.
Like that in some way. And this is where, you know, I bristle at it of it's just different. It's not, neither is better than the other. It's just often when they are discussed, it's very rare you see a discussion that is saying, hey, modules leading to emergent play. It's as though those two things can't exist. And I am obviously extremely biased and extremely stoked that you are having this particular experience, which is largely how I run my campaigns. Like this is the GMing thing that juices me up and gets me stoked. I'm like, yeah. Ooh, and then I grabbed this thing. Oh, wait, how does this work? Like I need this to make sense in the world so I can use this module. What am I keeping? What am I dropping? And then in between sessions going, well, that happened and that thing's going on and that building did catch on fire and that should matter. How does it matter? And that's super, super fun stuff. So awesome that the town itself also, because I was worried about that. That was one of the things for your campaign. I was kind of questioning was Torchwick, the town seems really cool and very exciting. And I was like, I don't understand how it's going to factor into play. So the fact that it is showing up as part of the discussion is super cool.
Mostly through downtime. Mostly through and some of the quest hooks in and around Torchwick are fused in. I will say it is, you know, to me, a starting town it plays two different roles or can play two different roles. And of course it can play multiple roles, but for me, I see them as two different things. Either the PCs are going to spend a lot of time in and around town getting to know people. And to me, that represents a specific style of play. The style of play that we're accomplishing or trying to accomplish is get to the dungeon, go in the dungeon, come back to town. And that doesn't really allow for a lot of time with the town itself. What it does allow for, though, is during learning and carousing to interpret those results through the lens of the town and then have it come alive that way. And then, ideally, things like the quest board will just naturally fall away because the people and things that have happened during learning, during downtime, those will bring about NPCs and locations, and then those can be used to generate quest hooks.
So to support that evolution of downtime and carousing going on, what I saw when I watched your session that I got to eavesdrop on was a lot of that stuff's happening kind of off screen so that the dungeon is the vast majority of on screen. How is that going? How is managing that time and pacing of dungeon exploration? How are you feeling that now that you're 3 sessions in?
Oh, Jody. Now we're getting to stuff that I want to improve upon. I am sort of on record on this show as saying that you know I'm much more of a role play guy. Like I have theater kid energy, et cetera, et cetera. And so I'm out of my comfort zone a little bit. Getting to the dungeon, we ran a monthly game for 2 years where we were just in the dungeon, so it's not like this is completely new to me. However, what I am realizing as these 3 sessions, or what I was realizing and have realized going through these 3 sessions, is that I need to do a better job of expediting the process of getting the players to the adventure location. This might be something that only I'm feeling. So I'm going to have to kind of feel out the groups and see if they, where they're at. But also, we're playing 2.5 hour, 3 hour sessions. So that's not much time to faff around and, as a GM. I'm fine with the players faffing if that's how they want to use their time. But also, we talked about different groups of people or different people coming to the group. There are some players that are gonna want to get to the dungeon and get in and start solving problems. There's gonna be players that want to role play, and so that is a needle that I am trying to kind of consistently thread. Is let's make time for the kinds of things that are fun and interesting for all players, but let's do it in the context of the dungeon. And so that is where I said, like, the quest board is both good and bad. The quest board provides choice, but choice always requires time. And we were worried about this. I actually think that the information gathering that we talked about in the last episode went very well. And I managed to not do what I normally do, which is to, embody some weirdo and, go off for 15 minutes without actually delivering any interesting information.
I thought it was really interesting on the one adventure I watched, how you did that all above table.
I did.
Which is
new to you.
Yeah. For me, I was like, what is Matt doing? I am uncomfortable watching Matt do this. This is not how Matt
haven't done that probably since the first time I ever ran a game of D&D. Which I did, and then I immediately was like, oh, I don't. But that's, yeah, so continue. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, it was fascinating to watch you, but it was also really cool. We talked a while back about both of us in doing this show almost know too much about each other as GMs.
Yeah.
So when you're sitting as a player, I am beginning to question if I have some small, don't send the white coats for me yet, but like my ability to on-off switch my GM brain and like in other parts of my life, like compartmentalize stuff. I'm like, I might need to talk to somebody. I compartmentalize really well to a degree that I don't know is healthy. But in this instance, it's super helpful because I can completely like detach. But in that instance where I was watching you run for the group, go in to explore the kobolds, I was in full GM brain the whole time, just watching you do your thing. And yeah, that was almost uncomfortable because I was like, this is not how Matt...
what's funny is eventually...
But it worked great. It seemed like,
yes.
I'll be honest, pizza showed up. My wife was cooking, so we had pizza delivered. That's not a general commentary on her. It was that night. And I went upstairs and got pizza. And when I came back, you guys were in it. You were in combat and you were fighting, and they were boldly going where I had heard a rumor that said, don't do that. But they said, hell with you. We're going.
They went in the front door.
Yeah. To the dungeon that was like, do not go in the front door. Right. We're like, nah, we're good. And they made a hasty retreat of their own accord. I was waiting for somebody to die, which gets me to my next question. Has anybody died?
Okay, Jody, we're probably going to spend a little time talking about this because no one has died. There were probably 2 instances where death was on the table. Now, just to be very clear, we're using some game modes, specifically deadly mode, which means that all death timers are 1 round and stabilization checks are a DC 18 intelligence. We're also using a house rule where I've done away with unconscious for PCs. If you get stabilized, you rise with 1 hit point. But all told, we haven't interacted with those rules at all. Let me kind of let's stay on this scene you just set. So the players who are going to this kobold cavern find out that there's basically one way in. There's a kind of babbling creek or small river running into the mouth of this cavern, but the kobolds that are inside there have made these kind of murder holes and made it basically a gauntlet to get in. And there's a lot of them. Like their numbers are very they are small and not particularly good at much, but there are a lot of them.
Clearly many more of them than there are of PCs.
And I was not using the kobold rules from Shadowdark. I don't like them. I don't like that you miss the first time. that to me would have made this scene actually way worse. Instead, we're using the rules that you came up with, which is like if they're in melee, they get +1 to hit, and I think it was +1 to hit for each one that was kind of around and adjacent to the enemy that they were trying to hit. They kind of do a gang up kind of a thing. Well, that was great, and it worked, and eventually the players who charged in were rebuffed, and this is where my sort of question comes in, Jody, which is I felt like that means that there was a reasonable challenge, a challenge that if the dice went in their direction, they might have been able to successfully break through. Maybe not. But they decided to turn back and find a different way in, and then were successful in securing some treasure and XP in other places. But the other time that there was a potential death was, I'm going to pull back the curtain here a little bit, the bandit tower in the keep, the session I ran yesterday. Well, an assassin shows up. The bandit queen is an assassin, which is, and these are level 1 characters.
Yeah.
2 attacks, +6, 2d4 damage. She showed up. They knew she was coming, so they weren't surprised. So she didn't get that backstab, but did 8 points of damage on 1 attack, missed the first attack, which was ridiculous, but missed the first attack, hit the second attack, did 2d4 damage, 4 on each die. Boom! 8 damage, almost took. I rolled randomly to see which of the 2 priests that I hit or was going to attack. It turns out that I attacked the wrong one. I think he had like 1 or 2 hit points left. And that was the only other time and they knew they were outnumbered, or not outnumbered, but they knew they were outclassed in terms of just sheer capability. So they parlayed. Now, these are the only 2 times where I really felt like death was on the table. The players might have felt differently. The first session had a kind of, clenching, a clench moment as well with the cave creeper. But I am wondering, and I'm not going to change anything. I'm running these adventures as written, as I sort of see them that they should be written. I am wondering, though, if I have arrived at the correct challenge level, which I know is something that you have worried about as well. And in a game like this, that is about dungeon delving and problem solving, appropriate challenges are important. Like that's how we create a fun and interesting game, is solving problems that are of an appropriate, or I suppose a sporting is the word I tend to like to use, a sporting challenge level.
I have so many opinions about this that are
go.
Well, they're controversial and they can come off as inflammatory. And I don't want to do that here on the show. Like so I'm prefacing this. If you are listening, I'm choosing my words carefully, and I still might screw this up. So as a listener, hang with me. And I'm gonna equivocate
Jody,
a little bit here.
This is our 64th episode.
Yeah, well, but it might be somebody's first.
Okay. Well, the Stan Lee rule is in effect.
Always the Stan Lee rule in effect. His light was gone too soon. Anyway, Excelsior. So there's this old classic style of play, not old school style of play, but classic. The original game assumed that levels of the dungeon corresponded to levels of monsters and levels of players. And as you went down levels of the dungeon, things became more challenging. The monster challenges became more significant. The danger level of the traps went up. Save or die starts coming up as you go down, or death ray. These things were assumed truths of a game. And there's been a lot of talk lately with Muster and other just online musings about RPG is G, a game. A game has reasonable stakes. When we gamble at a casino, those are games. We understand the conditions of those tests. You and I, once upon a time, lived athletic lives in team competition. There are rules so that we know we are competing as fairly as possible. Is sometimes one team just much, much better than the other? Yes, but within a reasonable spectrum. When I played American football, at no point did I, in high school, go play a D1 college team, because that would be unfair and unsafe. All of that same logic for me, feels like it should apply to an RPG for a satisfying experience. can there be situations where I, as a first level character, go down to a third level dungeon and knowingly get myself in way over my head? Sure. If that's the scenario. Or could there be a slide trap? Or there's lots of what ifs where we could end up there. I actually really feel strongly that going, oh, we're level 1. Here's my level 1 group of player characters. And now here's a Baylor has shown up, because isn't that cool that they stumbled into this chaos ritual and now there's a Baylor fighting them? Both narratively from a story standpoint and game-wise, it would be unsatisfying to me if they killed it. Like that, just unless there were some crazy extenuating circumstances, that monster is leveled in such a way that it should mop the floor with those characters. So now we take it back to where you're at of like, am I providing a meaningful challenge? And is death the metric by which we meter a meaningful challenge? There is a lot of talk because of the vibes and aesthetic of Shadow Dark that it should be death, that there are death timers and these things we should be talking about. And man, that is so idiosyncratic to every table, every player, every GM. You are running an online open table game. This is where I go, it maybe is unfair, but I go, you are the only arbiter that gets a vote. There's a vote of one is my punchline on this rant. And I think that is largely true actually of most tables. The GM has to determine where are they comfortable with character challenge and death. And then you have the responsibility of making that somewhat clear to your players. Now, you're playing an emergent game. This is part of the emergent is what are the stakes? I think in my campaign, my players know they will face challenges that are nasty. And if there are things that are beyond them, they are clearly telegraphed. They have pulled off the gas recently because a dragon showed up and they're going, oh, in my campaign, they're going, we're at level 4-ish. Maybe we should go look for weapons. Is this thing like running amok in the countryside? No, not at the moment. Okay, let's go look for weapons and also get on our grind. And like they understand that, and I'm cool with that. But that's me making the call about lethality in my game. And yes, when they were third level, if they had tromped down to be like, hi, dragon, how are you? It would not have gone well. I would not have pulled punches. I would not have. Now, the other hot take on this is if you are GMing, and this is really probably the spiciest bit, you are putting your thumb on the scale. You have just said, like, I'm running these authentically. I'm running the monsters, I assume, like, as though they are thinking monsters. The monsters want to live too. They're protecting their homes. They're doing what they should do. The bandit queen is behaving in a way that seems reasonable for her to behave. Even still, you said you rolled a d6 to see which priest she attacked, and it was the air quotes wrong one, meaning the one that wouldn't get iced. You could have, if she's an assassin, and there's somebody to be assassed, then she would know that. That's literally her job in that monster class.
Right.
That would be a totally reasonable call, that she starts reducing threats in the room.
Right.
The adventure I just ran, there was a demon, and there was a spell check to command the demon. That did not go well, so the demon was randomly attacking. The cultists that summoned the demons were not randomly attacking. Right. They were trying to put down people. That was but I still made that call, and you made the call to roll a decider die.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean. Like, as a GM, there is a level of being clear about what is the challenge level. And right now you're trying to play it straight and give appropriate level challenges. There's nothing wrong with that. And that doesn't mean people can't die. You and I have both seen, well, we've seen friendly fire take out characters.
Yeah.
That's a different issue. But, all of these, so it's a pile. This isn't an easy question. This is
No, this is sort of the at the heart of
right.
Many questions that many GMs have about running in the style that Shadowrun has kind of placed itself in. I want to add an addendum because I think there's a dichotomy here. There's keyed encounters and random encounters, which I think actually need to be disaggregated, because what you're talking about is keying an encounter with the Baylor is different to me than a random encounter where you can contextualize something very interesting. There was a conversation about this on the Discord that happened maybe a week ago about but what happens if like a Tarrasque shows up with a level 1 party? And it's like, of course you're not going to, if you roll a Tarrasque, let's say, as a random encounter, you're not going to drop it on a level 1 party, have it stomp them, walk away, campaign's over, or, like that's just lame. What you can do with a random encounter that you can't always do with a keyed encounter is you can contextualize it in a way that is interesting for players. So if you do want those wild and crazy things, and you do want to kind of run with these kinds of, you can contextualize random encounters in ways that are fun. The Tarrasque is sleeping. It has been under a spell that was placed upon it by a high-level wizard. It has been asleep for 1,000 years. Like, and you guys found, for instance, a massive giant in the middle of Dolmenwood that would have probably, if it was alive and well and could have killed you, it would have. It didn't when you found it because it was asleep. And to me, there's a way to make powerful enemies a part of low-level dungeons and adventures that is interesting, and that is contextualizing them in ways that are unexpected. And sure, telegraphing like, yeah, this is a massive monster that looks like a giant, a gargantuan dinosaur that could squash you with a single thought. And suddenly you have an interesting piece of lore in your world that there is a sleeping Tarrasque. Well, that's cool if that's the world that you want to build, right? Of course, like, you can curate your random encounter and keyed encounters however you want. But for me, the reason that let's talk about the reason that I didn't just have the assassin assassinate is I didn't know. I legitimately didn't know prior to that what those characters' armor classes were or hit points. So I could have asked, but this goes back to the pacing element. I wanted my turns to be snappy and quick, which means I roll a d6, 1, 2, 3, you, 1, 4, 5, 6, you, boom, 4, 5, 6, bam, okay. First attack misses, second attack hits, 2d4 damage. You take 8 points of damage as a poisoned dagger goes into your shoulder. Okay, my turn is over. A few things happen. We roll a morale check, which, by the way, morale checks continue to be just such an important part of the game. I think we were talking about this recently off mic. But for me, there's one thing that I have been finding that I'm just not vibing with, that you are. And that is Shadowdark Initiative, which, if done correctly, quote unquote, it means that like the players often, the only way to really tip the scales is to surprise them and skip their turns and have the monsters go and I like, this is just a different style of play. That is the one part of Shadowdark and running that I am having trouble with. Is it's advantageous, and there's no reason that online, where there's not an actual table, there's no reason to not let the players decide who gets to sit to your left. Why would you, like, if you randomize it, that's kind of lame. Like, the players would have agency if they were in person. Give them agency online. Okay, well, let's figure out who's sitting to my left. It's going to be the person with the highest dex. That means that anytime we roll initiative for combat, that person's inevitably going to, have a high chance of going first, or that we've created a situation where it's very unlikely that the monsters are going to go first. Well, to me, this is a fundamental thing about the system, and I've been trying to run it with fidelity, but it has caused in every session, maybe not this third session since they were in combat for like a bazillion rounds, and it was kind of one of those running combats you were talking about last episode. Or in one of our, it's kind of one of those running combats you were talking in one of our previous episodes. But like, I don't know. That is the one thing that's kind of sticking in my craw, is there is a way to game the system. I don't mind. It doesn't bother me when that's the point, when the point is going in dungeons, etc., and trying not to die. But it is creating a difficulty for me in creating a level of challenge when the deck seems to be stacked, just in terms of the mechanics of the game, against the monsters. That is something I'm contending with that I don't really know how to do, because surprising players is quite hard when they're smart, when they're listening at the door, and it feels unsporting to surprise them in almost any way except for you didn't do this thing, which I never like doing. I just refuse to do the well, you didn't say that you peered through the door carefully. Like, I don't know. That kind of stuff bothers me as a player, and so I don't do it as a GM. But I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that? This is kind of the last point that I wanted to bring up as far as like the challenge level.
I think regarding the challenge level, Shadow Dark, like a lot of classic fantasy, has a question of how many monsters. It is a very real part of the equation and process is how many monsters are you fighting against? And because there is some not hidden maths of just, okay, so the person to my left wins the initiative roll because they sat their thief or whatever there that's got a +3 or 4, and most monsters do not have that level of plus to their dexterity. So we roll, okay, they go first. So there are 4 or 5 attack rolls coming in. Well, if those 4 or 5 attack rolls and there's 4 or 5 monsters are all successful, then there are 4 or 5 potentially dead monsters. And then we get back and there's only 1 or there's less than half. Well, now instead I go, okay, so to counteract that, I'll have 10 monsters. Oh, now a couple of them missed, and now it's, 9 monsters versus 5 of them, and it can get away from there very quickly. And, that play loop is known. And I think for me, what I look for is that the vast majority of challenges in the dungeon that are, as you said, like scripted, set piece challenges. The room is keyed. That is what is in the room. There are this many kobolds in this room. That is a known piece, and I need to have a plan for how that should run out. That's part of my prep, is going, how will this combat roughly play out? What is the general vibe of these? Are they, as soon as they get to half, they're, what does a failed morale check look like for them versus what does a failed morale check look like for a group of gnolls who are frenzied? What are those differences? And just having a kind of context for myself. So that's part of it. The other part of it is, other than just being mindful of numbers and those sorts of things, is that with an old school game, what I have recently kind of come to terms with is that, not even with an old school game, I'm thinking aloud here, so bear with me. The 5e combats, there is a demand for every combat to be fairly interesting. Partly because they take freaking forever, so we want to hold people's interest. Also because people have lots of cool abilities, and you want them to use their cool abilities, and that's neat. There are a number of encounters you can get through if you're moving at a pretty brisk pace, that it's all right that, like, oh, so they put down some oil, they burned out some rats, the rats ran away or whatever, they came in, they stepped on a couple rats' necks, and they moved on. Sleep spell, squish, 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 next room. Well, but that was another attempt at rolling a sleep spell. That was a one less oil, and that degradation, which is very 5e, like building 5e kind of challenges, or like those high fantasy, high system, there's a lot of game system to the combat mechanics. It is about taxing the resource pool. That is also still true, and I think there is an amount of, the dungeon has been built with fidelity to be appropriate for that 1 to 3 level range. The monsters that are here are appropriate to those challenges. Yes, there are traps. If you didn't say you searched in any way, you get nailed by the trap. It feels bad, but I'm running what I wrote down outside. And that can be really hard to separate I did my prep. I thought about these things while I was doing my prep and writing this module and reviewing this module. Recently in my prep for my most recent session, I wrote my notes and then waited intentionally. I think it was either 3 or 4 days before I read my notes to like refresh my brain for the running. And I went and made changes because like, ooh, this challenge isn't fair. This challenge isn't appropriate. And there's an amount of like, okay, I have done my prep. I've done my due diligence to make this my level best reasonable, to present a reasonable challenge. And now I'm just going to let the Rube Goldberg run. Yeah. And part of my saying every GM puts their thumb on the scale. Otherwise, you don't need to be there. If all you are doing is literally exactly as close as you can to rules as written, you don't need to be there. The human element doesn't need to be there. So on some level, we are putting our thumb on the scale to adjust outcomes in the game to make it fun and enjoyable, in theory,
right?
Or to present the experience we want to present. So you let the Rube Goldberg machine run of the encounter that you've dialed as best you can and in a flawed system. and you put your thumb on the scale and you just hope for the best. And you know, how much you put your thumb on the scale. I roll behind a screen because occasionally I fudge dice rolls, say some people. Me, absolutely not. I roll in the open. I don't have a GM screen at all. That doesn't make me better or more noble. It's just, that's the game I run versus what somebody else does. And yeah, this challenge level dialing thing and at an open table and how much lethality and are the challenges appropriate. I assure you, in the one session I watched, they felt tested. Like that was a challenging session. And there was some discouragement. Like I could feel the energy of when they were rebuffed, they felt discouraged. That's okay. That's okay. And I'm not thinking that you felt that was a problem. I know a lot of GMs who go, oh man, they're kind of sad because they lost. Yeah, but then they get to the next thing. They understand to go find a secret door, which they found. Then they found and that stuff's cool. And it gets you to the next. So I don't know. I get twisted up about this stuff because I feel like a lot of what's talked about online is really reductive of something that is very complicated.
Well, it to me, it falls into two categories. It falls in the category of and these are pejorative kind of ways of describing it, right? It's like the AI GM who is just adjudicating things, rules as written, yada yada yada, which like again isn't really how I don't think anyone actually runs that way, right? But the like this is how the war game style is oftentimes characterized and caricatured is the like, well, you're just, beep boop, you are a computer and you adjudicate. And
I play fair.
Right. Well, it's like, okay. So that, but then on the other side, you have the GM that doesn't track hit points and just like the monsters die when everyone's done their cool thing and like nothing really matters. Everything's made up and there are no stakes and it's all just, smoke and mirrors. Right. And so somewhere in the middle lies, somewhere between those two things lies everybody. Right. But the last thing I want to say about this is I think the challenges that I presented to the players in those 3 sessions were fine and perhaps threaded the needle because they required problem solving. They tested every single character and there were stakes. The first session when they went into the sewers, there was a combat that a few dice rolls go, different ways and things look very different. The second game that you kind of that's the word you're using. I was going to say creeped in on, but lurked in on that one. We've been over it a couple of times now. They were rebuffed. Like they had to turn back. There were definite stakes there and definite challenge there. And then the third game, there was a moment where a couple of players were like, yeah, this we're going to change our tact here. I think that the only thing I want to say in closing is that the pacing thing, I want to go back to the pacing thing for a moment because there is one final thing that can affect challenge in games, and that is real world time, where you're running up against the end of the session, and these aren't players that you know well. They all have lives. They have signed up for an experience that takes X amount of hours and X amount of minutes, and I do think that I probably could have been harder on some of the learning or some of the carousing or whatever. But ultimately, like when we are playing these games, the thing that I always find to be the most enjoyable is the problem solving. And at the end of the session, maybe they got back to town a little easier than they might have otherwise. Or maybe there were a couple of things that were hand-waved that I didn't have to, but I decided to. I think this could have gone either direction. But I think ultimately, I don't think that the decisions that I made detracted from the experience. And when I look back on these 3 sessions, this is also a new experience for me. I haven't really run a lot of open table games online, meaning that I've only run 3. So ultimately, like what I wanted to do on this episode was really unpack some of the things that went well, some of the things that I've been ruminating on. I don't even think these are things that went poorly at all. I just think these are things that every GM thinks about. Like, am I challenging my players appropriately? And am I also making sure that the game is fun and that those challenges don't create a demoralized set of players?
I think that's reasonably well said and something that, as you said, every GM has to look at. Let's cut to our sponsor and hear from them, and then we'll come back and see what takeaways we have.
Dungeon Master Diaries is brought to you by Stingbats Magazine, Issue 0. Available for free on itch.io right now. There's a link in the show notes. Now, normally we have other sponsors on our show, and we love our sponsors, but this is special, and it's something that I feel like our listeners would be interested in, and it's something that I am very proud of. So, a handful of months back, myself and Nick Campbell, or Cree, on the Shadow Dark Discord, got together and decided that it was time to put together a community zine, something that would publish submissions from various community members. We worked really hard on this, and quite frankly, Nick worked way harder on this than I did, but it is awesome. And it features contributions from Jody alongside Gels and Kiwi, the Encyclopedia, and Lauren, all of whom are stalwart members of the Shadow Dark Discord channel and who gave us unbelievable and creative stuff. So, if you want to take a look at Stingbats Volume 0, which features the starting town of Torchwick, you can go to the itch link in the description. Do it now! Get it for free. And if you like it and you want to see more, we would really love it if you filled out our community survey to tell us what kind of thing you want to see us do next, because the response to this has been great, and we want to make more. We want to publish more community members' stuff in cool and interesting and useful ways in future issues. So, huge thank you to everyone involved, all the contributors, to Nick for laying this thing out and making it look unbelievable. And I just want to leave you with a little message from one of the people you might see in Torchwick.
Well, well, well. Welcome to Torchwick. Name's Jubbins. If it isn't a new face, don't blink. The town likes to see your eyes, make sure they're yours. Now that you're here, probably be wanting a torch. Everybody does, sooner or later. The torchbearers make the finest in all the realm, they say. Burn blue and burn long. The sap of the big oak in the middle of town. If you're looking for comforts, you'll find them at the sun-kissed respite, tuck you in warmer than a grave. And if you're looking for something to eat or drink, might I recommend the kindly crawl. If you hear scratching under the cobbles at night, that's just the underdrain breathing. Town's got old bones and older promises. Best not to go wandering down wells without a light and a reason. But you look curious. That's good. Curiosity is the finest meat in Torchwick. You stick close to old Jubbins here, yeah? Show you the shortcuts, the side doors, the places where a body can learn what's inside themselves for real and true. Excuse me. Welcome to Torchwick, friend.
Outstanding. And, congratulations. Nice work.
Oh, hey, you too, man.
Thanks. Hey, genuinely, thank you. All right, let us bring the topic into the light with some takeaways from this discussion about the notes from Matt's newly formed Open Tables. Matt, what do you have for us?
All right, so in addition to our last conversation about challenge level, I think the only thing that I want to reflect on additionally is that one of the things that we didn't discuss is that XP and treasure are usually tied to risk, and the riskier that something is, perhaps the more valuable the treasure and the larger the XP bonus. So I just, in the context of talking about challenges and making them level appropriate, I think that's an important thing that we didn't necessarily have time or didn't really get to. So I wanted to shoehorn that in here at the end, that XP and treasure to me are rewards for risk. The riskier something is, the higher the rewards are going to be.
I think that's very sound advice. Another piece of advice that is just colloquially thrown around is that travel broadens the mind, right? That if you get out and see the world, that like it just shifts how you feel about things and changes you as a person. In watching your open table game, to put probably too grandiose a point on it, an open table is travel for a GM's mind. It's a new experience. It's new vibes. It's new players. It's new energy, different people than you usually play with. And I'm going to be honest with you, as schedule allows, I intend to lurk more sessions for that very reason.
I love it. You're always welcome, Jody.
Thank you.
So my second takeaway is that no one died. And I really think that Shadowdark just isn't as lethal as people say it is. I mean, we've adjusted death timers. Sure, everyone had a luck token, but they couldn't use it on everyone else's rolls. They could only use it on their rolls. And yet, nobody even went to 0 hit points. So either I'm just a big baby, or Shadowdark actually, if you leverage your class, background, and ancestry, it isn't as lethal as people say.
Yeah, you can work the problem, it turns out. As my final, because I got to get in something else because it's just a hot button for me, GMs and challenging your players. If you struggle with this, start with what seems fun to you as a player. If you were in a player's chair, what is a fun challenge to you? And then understand that as the GM, you can multiply that. You can do it over and over and over in one session. You might not need all of the possible challenge in every single room. But what is fun for you? What is a challenge that gets you going? Lean into that. As the torchlight grows dim, we hope you were able to find something useful in this episode that you can take into a future game. If you have any questions or unique experiences from your table that you'd like us to discuss in a future episode, you can email us at dmdiariespod@gmail.com. You can also reach out via YouTube or Facebook, or best of all, get us on the Dungeon Master Diaries thread on the Shadowdark Discord channel. You can find links to those feeds and any other materials we referenced in this episode's show notes. Until next time, may Torchwick remain light and your shadows be dark.
Uh-oh. I scrolled away. Dungeon Master Diaries production of Stingbat Radio Network is produced by Jody Kropholler, edited by Matt Bruner. International music is composed by Christian Schuster. Dungeon Master Diaries, an independent production, is not affiliated with the Arcane Library LLC. Shadowdark RPG is a product of the Arcane Library, copyright 2023. Professional, Jody.
Read the script, man.
Yeah, but I had scrolled away and I still got through
No, but I did for once.
Oh, you did it right.
Yeah.
Incredible.
God.
Talking to through the outro is what all the cool kids do.